All right, phone was being stupid. Um, but he's continuing on. Transcendental oil. It's basically Chad's version of a form of consciousness. Particularly, he says that the structure of transcendental oil as a substance um, is, or what I would call a concept, or maybe an idea, if one wanted to be that way, is that oil is explosive, self-expanding, and that this manifests. Uh, Hello there. Sorry for the cutting off the stream. Hopefully this is better. I was continuing on. Transcendental oil as a concept, as the substance of society, is for Chad a explosive. It is self-expanding, and so we see this manifest in a society pretty straightforwardly. One, it manifests in the fact that oil is omnipresent in our society, in objects, and that we have this vague intuition of oil everywhere. It's in everything that we do. It's literally in the things that we fucking eat. Seriously. It's also present in specific determinate objects, particularly, the prime essential object of oil is for Chad the machine. The machine which is meant to do work for the sake of producing, for the sake of expanding production endlessly. And so, the machine is made by oil, works on oil, and produces things so that it may keep forever burning oil. The machine produces, more machines through varied mediations, and therefore, just keeps on burning oil to burn more oil. Another one is Chad has this layer he calls memology, which I don't see the point of, honestly. It seems to me like kind of a rather unnecessary thing. Where memology is literally memes. But, not memes in the stupid, SpongeBob sense, but rather memes in a deeply meaningful symbolic sense. Maybe you would call it a symbolic order, in which these memes are the simple geometrical designs which are telling of the transcendental concept. No, not memes in the SpongeBob sense. Memes in that these are shapes, very basic shapes, which manifest a concept. So, Chad says, for example, that uh, like when I say Hegel's concept is just the infinity symbol, that's a deep meme. That's an image, a simple image that shows you the conceptual paradigm, so to say. Uh, so the deep meme of oil society for Chad is the upward arrow. Well, look at a SpongeBob meme, and you know what I mean. Anyways, the deep meme for oil society is the upward arrow. The endless arrow, just trending upward growth that everybody loves to see when they get back their 401k, they get their 401k, or they buy some stocks, or anything. You have a nice little graph and it always goes up, 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 up. And that's the deep meme. That's the basic image of our society for Chad. Uh, Another level is the systematic level, in which Chad says that, for example, the paradigm of systematicity, systematic knowledge in oil-based society is something like Google, where Google can provide to you an unbelievable amount of, maybe like 2 million, plus hits for like any search that you can make. But most of it is garbage. Most of it is just repetitions, and most of it are just mirrored sites. Most of it is irrelevant to what you're actually looking for. And it's because the systematic form of knowledge in an oil-based society is just endless swaths of abstract information, abstract values related to abstract values, and and they don't really convey very much. This is then later. I think he hints at it that he thinks that people like Hegel and Marx and other systematic thinkers fall into this problem. I don't think so. I think that's a bad critique. But nonetheless, what he means by systematicity in that sense, I understand and I agree. And then finally, there's another level of social determination in which the concept appears as a mythology. And so the mythology of oil society for Chad is the mythology of progress, of endless progress, both the development of technology that, that to fix all of our problems, we just have to burn more oil. We have to build more technologies. We have to improve technologies. We have to build more machines, and that will fix the problem. And Chad says that's like, the idea of that is like the idea of putting out a fire with more fire. The problem is caused originally by machines. We have been burning fossil fuels to do what? To power machines. And we want to fix it by building more machines. Um, and if oil is indeed the only thing left to us, it does indeed seem that that is a stupid way to fix it, that you're not going to fix it. And he says that even people who are, environmentally conscious, even people who are green, who are tree huggers, they don't understand that the issue is not going to be solved by asking for better technology, because technology, if we are indeed limited to just oil, cannot fix this. That the only answer is really to reduce our energy footprint, is to quite literally start using less energy. And so, in that criticism, I completely agree. If the problem is that there's nothing else but oil, we're fucked. And the only fix is going to be that once it's over, the party's over, and we're going to have to simplify our way of life quite a lot. And then he blames people like Marxists for being simplistic and and reducing everything to particularly certain things. He says like the Marxists focus too much on what he calls the objective layer of meaning. That they view the world through that transcendental schema of machines, and I think that's a bad criticism of Marx, particularly because Marx is actually pretty good on that. Marx he talks about the metabolism of nature that we must engage with, and how there must be limitations that we cannot ignore. There's also the sense in which, obviously, people actually, I've heard this from socialists quite a while back, in which people said, if we want to bring up the rest of the world to a moderately good living standard like us, we of the first world will actually have to lower our standards. We live at a very unrealistic high peak uh, of energy consumption, which the rest of the world cannot match. So if you want to have an equal opportunity of quality of life for the rest of the world, our quality of life must go lower. Therefore, we must consume less uh, resources. We must consume less oil. We must burn less oil. But nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear about it's like, oh well, now you got to ration things. Rationing, that's what they do in communism, right? As if money isn't rationing. Uh, but all that stuff, it's rather good. I think it's an interesting take with the whole five registers of meaning, or five layers of meaning. Um, Chad thinks that myth is, the ultimate layer of meaning, which everything else derives from. The stories that we tell ourselves about our place in the world and whatnot. And he's not the first one to say that. I think there's plenty of other thinkers that have come up with this exact idea. It's not new at all. I think it was around back when Hegel was around. Where people are already talking about how the ultimate meaning of things was aesthetic anyway. That you go back to Nietzsche, you go back even further to the Romantics, and the whole thing is it's all a story we tell ourselves, and reason is the subservient faculty which just deals with then trying to rationalize this myth that we've told ourselves. Um, but if that were true, and I'm not sure that Chad thinks this is true, it's not clear to me yet. Um, if that were true, then Chad's whole account itself would just be another myth. And, why should we take that seriously? And so that's one of the things in which I think he has a trouble. And I'm curious as to how he'll deal with that if he deals with that, about how he's going to try to justify his epistemology and ontology, and how he's going to justify why the categories he's chosen, why the 5 layers he's chosen are absolutely necessary, and why we can't consider having anything else. I mean, they're useful. They're useful categories. They're interesting to look at the world that way, but I don't see them and go, wow, that's a necessary way to look at it. That's just one way to look at it, and it's not even internally necessary as far as I can tell. Um, so there's something which I think he falls short of, say, somebody like Marx or Hegel. Another one, no, I didn't even mention this one, about how the transcendental concept of oil. Transcendental oil manifests itself. The substance has this attribute of manifesting in the economic sphere, as he thinks that the ultimate form of this is banking. Lending money. Making money off of finance. And he goes back to the old term for it, back before modernity. It's usury, and he would hate usury because usury is the reason he's in India and not in the United States. Obviously, he had a he had a moderate student debt. I mean, like I think he only took about $17,000 out for pay for his lead grad schools, insofar as he went. But even that, once he got out, uh, became like the interest on it skyrocketed immensely, and he just couldn't pay it back. And what else do you call that other than usury? It's a shit. I'd say it's almost extortion. Well, no, it's not almost extortion. It is extortion. It's further than that. It's slavery. It's that at least in the United States, the amount of power that a lender has over you to force you to pay back, even if they do unethical things to get you as a student to take on these loans, promising you a job that's never going to be there, that they know it's not going to be there, but they don't care. All they want is their money. The government has said, don't worry, you'll never lose because we'll guarantee that they pay back no matter what. We'll garnish their wages, we'll do all these other things, and they do. And so uh, finance as the ultimate appearance of oil in the economic sphere is a pretty interesting one. It's a pretty clear one as well. That finance is also pure capital. It's absolute capital. It's just pure explosion of wealth. You put in a little bit and you get out a lot. It explodes upon itself. It expands upon itself, and that's the logic of oil. And so those kinds of things are interesting. So far, the schema strikes me as pretty well laid out, but pre-Hegelian, pre-German idealist in a sense, in which I think that there's something about the German idealist which I very much love, and that is that this autism they have about systematicity is really good, because when you read them, you know exactly where things are coming from, and you don't have this jumping out, because it's very easy. It's super easy to read things and go, oh, that makes sense. Of course that makes sense. Wow. And yes, it does make sense. I'm not saying it's false. But it's also not entirely true. And that's the problem, that unless you can guarantee the links, because there's a way that he's moving, which is actually the way that people used to do it classically, which is by analogy. That's how it moves. You're moving by analogy, by putting a fundamental structure, then mapping it out to its different forms and saying, it's appearing here, it's appearing there. And if you have nothing else to do, that's probably the best way to do it. Because if you don't have an immanent method, you can't do it any other way, other than just positing things. And ultimately, what you're always doing by positing is you're following the analogy structures, or you're doing a conceptual derivation. This makes a good transition to the other thing that I was reading, that I've been reading with my friend Hyperion, because I was reading a book by Ian Hamilton Grant, about Philosophy of Nature after Schelling, and he mentioned that Schelling fundamentally bases his entire nature philosophy on trying to, make a modern Timaeus. Timaeus is one of the books by Plato, and it's one of the most speculative, mystical books by Plato. Sorry, I haven't been looking at chat. I didn't realize. Are those lemon trees behind me? Yes, those were lemon trees. This is a whole lemon farm. Uh, Various lemons. They even have Buddha's hand here. Hey, Dan. Um, but anyways, so I've been reading the Timaeus, and if you read the Timaeus carefully, it's very easy to see that Timaeus is going through these conceptual analogical shifts. That when they can do the conceptual derivation, when they say, oh, well, but this implies this, imminently, in which you say this concept has this other determination imminent to it, you move that way. And then when you reach that point and you don't know where to go, and you're like, okay, what kind of thing, is like this? You go by analogy and you say, well, this sort of other thing, seems to go in this kind of structure, and then you move that way. And it's very interesting. No, he doesn't bite. Just a good one. But anyway, so that's interesting, and I've been slowly also trying to make an outline of how the Timaeus moves, and to show that it indeed is pretty conceptually unified. And the Timaeus is actually somewhat difficult because it's a lot of geometric autism, and I am not very well versed in geometry. When I took geometry in 8th grade, I think I got a D because I didn't give a fuck. The teacher was honestly boring. The subject was boring. I didn't give a shit. And so, that now comes back to haunt me, that laziness in that period. But nonetheless, I think I'll just go and look up on explanations about those, because there's a couple. I understand most of it. I just don't understand a couple of things, which are specifically about the aspects of geometry that I'm not aware of. Certain things about ratios and whatnot. But once I comprehend those, I think it's pretty simple to show that there's indeed just a pretty nice logical flow. And that's what you really want to have with any philosophy. You want to have a logical flow where, everything moves along, bit by bit by bit. And I think that when you can't do that, you've fallen into a failure right there. That the fact that you have this jumpiness, where you have these gaps, is a failure of your account. And so I think that Chad certainly falls into that problem. And so I titled my other stream before I had to restart it, so I want to talk about philosophy of nature. So reading a book by Ian Hamilton Grant called Philosophy of Nature after Schelling. I'm only about 40 pages in. Interesting stuff. It's always, I don't know about you, if you ever read stuff that you really don't like, stuff that you fundamentally feel that you disagree with. It's bothersome to me. It's, and you have to fight that, and I can fight that, luckily. But it's very rare, but nonetheless, it does happen, where you've got this antagonistic mindset, in which you've got your position, they got their position, and the moment you read their arguments against yours, you start feeling it. You start feeling that fight or flight mechanism of as if you yourself are being insulted or attacked or something. It's very stupid that we have that, but oh well. Well, no, it's not stupid. I can understand it. So that happens. So I was reading the Ian Hamilton book, Grant's book. Let's just call him by his last name. And every time he brought up things about, oh, Hegel didn't do this, or these other people don't understand this, I kind of got that rise, and I just had to take a little moment to take a breather and calm down and go, like, come on, man, it's just an argument, and if they're right, they're right. What's there to be mad about? If they're right, they're right. If you're wrong, you're wrong. Nothing bad about it. So while reading it, I like what I read. It's a lot about how the background of philosophy of nature prior as to how the Timaeus deals with it and how it's just one symbol. It's this problem about physics and how Schelling wants to create a universal physics and absolute physics. Am I voting for Bernie, Tulsi, or Marianne? Don't know who Marianne is, but I'll vote for Tulsi. Um, in the primaries. What do I think about Peterson versus Zizek? It'll probably be funny. I'm not excited about it. I'm not really a fan, honestly. I don't know who Marianne Williamson is. I'd like to watch it. If I'm around, I'll watch it with my friends. Like everybody's gonna watch that. It's gonna be a show. How good of a show? Who knows? Um, yeah, I think Tulsi's the most progressive candidate so far. Uh, realistically, I think that Bernie, unfortunately, has kind of gotten to Edgar Marco. What's up, you Washingtonian bastard? I've been all right. So, anyways, what I was talking about? Yes, Schelling philosophy of nature, a theory of physics, and by physics, these are classical philosophers. They're autists, and they like to go back to the Greek. So physics as physis. Always going back to the ancient roots of terms, this philosophical etymology, to validate themselves as doing both what is modern as well as going beyond the modern by taking in the past. Uh, the main thing that it's not that what he said about Hegel. It's just like what he was saying about certain things that you must do. I don't have a PhD. I don't have a degree at all. Nah. I just like philosophy and I read. But anyway, so what I was saying, I'll get back to the Hegel thing. So Schelling's trying to do a universal physics, and so there's something that he splits between what's called theoretical philosophy, which he calls subjective idealism, and then real philosophy, which is objective idealism. And they're supposed to be two sides of the same coin. The theoretical philosophy is just supposed to be the proof of the theory of the conscious self. The objective idealism is supposed to be the development of the system of nature, the existence of this logic itself. And it's not supposed to be a temporal order, by the way, and it's not a temporal order for Hegel as well. People don't understand this. It's also not a logical priority either. People also don't understand this. It seems to me, because there's a misunderstanding there, in which. So I'll save Hegel for a bit. You switch to physics. Look into the fringe. That's where the good stuff's at. Particularly, actually, look up Pierre-Marie Robitaille. He has an interesting theory about the sun. He says the sun is liquid hydrogen, liquid metallic hydrogen. And it's because he proved that Kirchhoff's law of the black body radiation was not valid. That the way people were thinking about it is completely invalid for gases, so it doesn't work. The only things that can make the spectrum of the sun is something liquid, not something gaseous. So looking at that, interesting. Anyways, so philosophy of nature has to be an account that is. What do I think about T.H. Bradley? Don't know because I haven't read him. He's the one who originated the A and B theories of time, right? Or is that another one of the British idealists? I can't remember. So anyway, the objective theory of nature, or the philosophy of objective idealism, would be an account of matter as such, and the evolutionary power of matter, which tells you why and how the universe exists as it does as nature. And so, subjective idealism theory, objective idealism, the reality, would be two faces of the same coin of the absolute. And so, there's a difference between the Schellingians and Hegelians, in which the Schellingians do not have this third positing of spirit or mind over and against nature or logic. They think that this is legitimate. They think that this is not something that you can actually posit, mainly because, and I think part of the criticism is actually right. Part of the criticism against Hegel is that Hegel doesn't give nature freedom, because if you're going to have an absolute account of nature as something that exists in for itself, uh, you have to have an account of nature as free. You can't just say, oh, well, the freedom is here in the logic, but it's, nature's all necessity. It doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense for Hegel either, by the way. Grant attacks Hegel for this, but I don't think that counts, because Hegel's own philosophy, by necessity, requires that everything after the logic must itself be a free determination of the idea. So it's not just like, oh, well, nature's pure necessity. No, it's not. It's a necessity, yes, but it's a necessity by account that nature is ruled by externality, not because nature is ruled by something outside of nature. Nature is free. It determines itself to be what it is on its own power, its own account. There's also the attack of subjectivism, in which people will go and try to limit nature to what we can phenomenally experience. So when you put intellect as higher than nature, Grant thinks that you're making a mistake in thinking that the limits of your cognition, the limits of what you know and what you can experience, is the limits of nature. And I agree with that criticism. I agree that there is no reason to think that we are the highest hot shit in the universe. As a matter of fact, I think there's empirical evidence that we're not. I think that there's, if you're really into weird stuff like I am, if you look into parapsychology and other weird phenomena, there's stuff that just breaks the mold of everything that we think nature is, and goes beyond these simplistic models that we have of it. And these things speak not just to things that we have not seen on the lower scales, but also on the higher scales. Higher levels of mind, for example. If you think about something, the possibility of psychic ability, for example, would be a higher reality of mind. It would be literally the equivalent of what Kant calls intellectual intuition. The unity, the immediate unity of intellect and being. That what you think is objective reality. Is there a possibility for that? Does it make sense to me? In a way it does, in a way it doesn't. Could it be real? I think there's some stuff that kind of points to the fact that it might be real. Perhaps not in the way that, the immediately magical way that people think. Maybe it's mediated by some other little, nudgings here and there about certain things. But that's possible. Do you think reincarnation is possible? Sure, yeah. Look into some of the reincarnation cases that were studied. Why is it? There's a chair of there's a chair of reincarnation at some top university, because a billionaire funded it permanently. And the research that was done on that is interesting. You look at the cases, and some of those cases are like, how are you going to explain that? Unless you are willing to claim that, one, these people are lying, or that there is some absolutely bizarre, unknown mechanism by which somebody else's memories who's dead can get into your head. There's the only other option is reincarnation. And I mean, if somebody else's memories get into your head, that's as good as reincarnation as it gets for me. Yeah, there's a couple of documentaries, and so interesting stuff like that. It's telling that there might be a higher level reality of which we here do not experience in our everyday lives, and so reducing nature to what we can cognize right now, or what we can experience right now, is completely stupid. Yeah, that was a boy. The case you're talking about. I know which one you're talking about. There's quite a few cases that are really interesting. So there's stuff like that. On the other hand, however, the positing of something higher than nature, in that what goes higher is simply this. Uh, oh, by the way, if you're interested in something really weird, the writer Jack London, his daughter had a chance meeting with this pianist, this parlor pianist, at some Jack London meeting in San Francisco once. Um, and he was given a task to to come up with a tune for a song that Jack London had written, but which nobody knew the tune of, except the daughter who was there, and she was old. She was in her 60s, late 60s by then, I think, and this guy was somewhere in about his 40s. And he went there, and he just looked at the sheet, started, playing around with the piano a little bit, came up with a tune, and played it. After he was done playing it, the daughter is in the back. He didn't know. She stops him while he's walking out, and she asks him, "How did you know how to play that song?" And he's like, "Well, I just came up with it." And she's like, "That's exactly how my father played it. That's a tune," because she remembered that tune from when she was a child. Later on, they kept in contact, and it came out that this guy and Jack London had an immense amount of coincidental correspondences, which led his daughter to be convinced that this guy was the reincarnation of her father, because he had capacities and certain things which she said, immediately reminded her of her father. Not only that, I don't know if you ever heard of this weird thing about how people just meet and they just kind of have the feel, it's that feel, that feely feel that feels, and they just know. And so she's like, the first time he walked by, she's like, she just knew, and he just knew as well. It's kind of this weird thing of, you have a weird moment, but at the same time, it's not weird, kind of like that. So look into that story. There's actually a video on YouTube. It's about like 20 minutes long, I think. It's a little mini documentary. Uh, and the guy now, I think he died somewhere in the last decade. But weird stuff, weird stuff. Uh, it at least points to me to nature being more than uh, what we normally think. So, limiting nature to our cognition and what we normally experience is definitely stupid. And so I agree with that. But I was saying uh, that attack on Hegel, I don't think fully works either, because Hegel also was all for redeveloping the philosophy of nature at all points when necessary, and as you know things come up. So but it's not a handmaiding of the sciences either. It's not behind, like, his philosophy isn't shadowing the empirical sciences. Uh, that's not what you're supposed to do when you're philosophizing about nature. You're supposed to be the one telling science what nature is, not letting science tell you what it is. So science says, "Oh, well, nature's made out of quarks." You tell science to go fuck itself. Why? Because you don't care about quarks. You care about matter. You want to explain matter. Apparently, when people reincarnate, they look like each other. Very People carry their visage across lives. So maybe find his photo or something. So, anyways, so yeah, those attacks on Hegel for logicism, as well as this limitation of nature, as well as the reduction of nature to pure necessity. I don't think those quite work. I think those attacks are based on misunderstandings. Sorry, I think they're based on misunderstandings of Hegel, and I can't blame Grant, because to grasp Hegel to the proper level of depth is quite a struggle. And when you're academia, at a certain point, much of what you do is really just kind of like, you do read things for yourself, but at the same time, it's such a struggle that you gotta let your peers influence you quite a bit, and quite a bit of the peer literature on Hegel is pretty crap. Interesting. Go walk. You like walking. But yeah, that's all the philosophical ramblings I had for today. Besides having the thing about Chat's book, uh, what is it? See, I would compare Chad's book to uh, Atlas and Prometheus by Giorgiani, and I would say they're like completely antithetical. Yeah, I'd publish it through Zero Books, definitely. Uh, I don't think Doug would understand it, but sure, I could send him things, and the standard of publishing with Zero Books is not very high, so I'm pretty sure I could. Uh, yes, Pierre Marie Robitaille, the liquid metallic hydrogen sun. No, Doug's not a neocon. Doug's just a left liberal. He buys into the whole Russia Gate thing, and he thinks Trump is the worst thing in the world. Uh, but no, he's not a neocon. The nice thing about living next to all these orchards with lemons and fruit and shit. I don't know if he's a rad lib. I don't follow Doug. I haven't followed him for quite a while. Like, I just liked his original videos on YouTube. Robitaille doesn't believe in the Big Bang. He thinks that most of the cosmic microwave background radiation is literally just our own water, our own oceans, water signal bouncing up in space. And he's shown that the satellites that we've used to measure the cosmic microwave background have not been sufficiently shielded from that planetary background. So that's something to keep in mind. That's definitely something. I'll tell you right now. I don't believe in the Big Bang. I think it's complete horseshit. I don't believe in black holes either. And when I say I don't believe in black holes, I don't believe in the entities people describe as black holes. That there's phenomena that we can point to that's called black holes. Yeah, like for example, we got the image lit recently. Yeah, that's a black hole. All right. If by black hole you just mean the vision of that phenomena. If you want to tell me that this is some kind of thing that got crunched up beyond his Schwarzschild radius, I'm not going to believe that. I'm not going to believe that because we don't know how that's even possible. We just posit that it's possible because of mathematics. Despite it going against everything else that we know about how matter works, we posit that things can fall below their Schwarzschild radius. You may believe that. I don't. To me, that kind of stuff is pointless. I don't believe in the Big Bang mainly because the Big Bang is literally nonsense. Doesn't make sense. You look at it as a cosmology, the origin of space and time. Nah. The beginning of the universe. Nah. The origin of matter. Nah. None of that makes sense for that. That we could have some pretty big explosions and big fireworks in the sky. Oh yeah. I believe that. Just look at petroglyph drawings. Look into the work of the plasma physicist Anthony Perrott, who showed that in high energy plasma formations, yeah, the universe always existed. Of course, it's the universe. Where would it come from? Like, it's literally Hegel has a point on this, which is like unbeatable, just logically. The universe cannot possibly begin. Finite things cannot possibly begin in an absolute sense. There's always a before and there's always an after. That's what it is to be finite, which tells you, it doesn't mean that like our local region of the universe couldn't begin. Literally, there's also no limit to scales. There's no smaller scale. Like there's no Planck length. That's the limit of size. That's stupid. That's nonsense. Literally, that would only be the case and could only be the case if we lived in a digital simulation. Any analog natural universe could not possibly be limited in any possible range of scale. it would have to accrete infinitely higher at infinite levels and infinitely lower at infinite levels. It's all turtles all the way down. There's no reason that it couldn't be. That's a very, according to the very concept of spatiality, that's just how it has to be. The same thing for temporality. Time doesn't have a beginning, and time isn't really a thing. Like the idea of moving through time doesn't make sense. Now, there's stuff that I believe in that nonetheless contradicts what I'm saying, um, but that has to do with some other things which have to do with spiritual realities of mind, which are beyond me. I've tried to think about them. I don't know how to think about them. Stuff like remote viewing completely breaks shit, both spatially and temporally. Oh yeah, matter determines itself definitely. You know that, for example, the forces of matter are not forces. It's the force of matter. There aren't forces. There's just one single force. It's just like the ideal of all physics, the ideal of all science defined is the universal single law of everything. The theory of everything. The reality is the theory of everything, however, is not complex at all. The theory of everything is just like Hegel's concept. It is supremely simple. But precisely because it's supremely simple, it is self-articulated in infinitely complex form. Uh, so, if you think the theory of everything is going to be like this long theory, like string theory, uh, you're out of the loop. Everybody knows it's got to be simple. It's literally got to be like a two-term thing. It's literally got to be like a recursive mathematical equation of an infinite fractional sum of sorts, or what is it? Those sums of sums in which things just sum on top of each other. Upon numbers. 1 + 2 = 3. 3 + 2 is 5. 5 + 3 is 8. 8 + 5 is 11. That kind of thing. That kind of recursion is exactly what you would expect of the complexity of that thing. It wouldn't be complex at all. It would just be an equation, quite literally. And this whole thing about different parameters. Of course, it wouldn't be a mathematical equation. Actually, that's nonsense. It would be a qualitative measure equation. And the qualitative and the equation itself would generate qualities, and that's exactly what a philosophy of nature is. It is the equation of the generation of both the qualities and the quantities of the relations of nature. And so, to have a theory of everything, you must have a philosophy of nature. You can't have a physics that is a theory of all physics if you don't have a philosophy of nature that tells you why matter has the force that it does, why it has the powers it does. What do you mean refuting myself? What do you think that I said earlier? Maybe you came in a portion in which you misheard what I was talking about. All right. Well, Adam Tidor explains to me how I refuted myself. I don't know on what. Do I have any theories of time travel? Time travel can't be possible. Just a priori, not possible. If you know about remote viewing, there's a way to time travel in that. Because time is not a thing. It's not a space that you travel in any normal sense. Read my blog on the philosophy of nature, space-time. Well, there's no reason to think there's more than 3 dimensions. Now, there's no reason to think that there's more than 3 dimensions. That's the only reason. Theoretically, we could have infinitely many more. Um, Actually, I wrote something on this in my updated blog because I updated it last week. And if you check it out, it's really autistic. Empyrean Trail. Yeah, he wants to be friendly. He just wants to say hi.
It's okay. Good boy. Good boy.
He already interacts with other dogs.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's fun either. He loves to meet new dogs.
that's good.
Come on.
See ya.
Come on.
Have a good one.
You too. Yeah, Empyrean Trail. Check that out. Go to the tab on the right, Philosophy of Nature, Space, Time, whatever. So I recently updated that. There's stuff there. Oh, dang it. Quit being a bad boy. Quit being a bad boy. Come on. Oh, he was chasing after another dog. But if you look there, there's a bit on the geometrical nature of space, the mathematical nature of nature. And the thing on time, I'm actually working on that right now. That's something that I've been thinking about for like a year over and over, every once in a while when I have the time. Because it is an interesting thing. Both I talk about why the limitation of 3 dimensions, why we might have some reasons, some empirical reasons, to think that there might be more dimensions. We don't have any good evidence. I don't know if you ever heard of stuff like dark flow, cosmic dark flow. It's a region of galaxies and whatnot that's going towards a great attractor, which we know not what. And some people posited that it's either a universe right next to ours, brain theory, or it's the presence of a 4-dimensional object, somehow beyond the veil. So to say, because gravity, goes beyond. The idea of gravity that people have is that gravity travels between spaces, based on what? Complete posited bullshit. But it was at first. People are starting to get away from it's still the mainstream idea, and it'll be the mainstream idea for quite a while. But there's some people who are starting to move away from the dark matter idea. And can you see? No, you cannot. You cannot see the sunset here. Oh, yes, you can. Check that out. Hello. Oh God, something happened and now I don't know what the hell's going on. Does it look fine? Okay, because like the window is kind of really weird. It's like minimized on my phone. I don't know why. Nothing I can do about it. Why is light so fast? Luminiferous ether. No, I don't mean it in the old sense of the stuff that was disproven by Michelson and Morley. Any theory of physics that wants to explain even gravity has to explain the physicality of space itself. Space is full of matter, and as a matter of fact, it's wrong to say space is full of matter. Space is material. It's a very, very fine amount of matter. That for us is just so minute that it hardly offers any resistance. When you have a medium, it's easy to explain why something travels at a set maximal rate within the medium. It's just a wave, it's a propagated wave. Of course, there's plenty of intricacies to the nature of light, which put to question the problem of the wave nature. But even more stuff puts to question the problem of its particular corpuscular nature. The usual way to resolve the whole it's a wave and it's a particle is the bullshit of wave-particle duality. Oh, well, it's a particle, it's a quantized energy packet, and the wave is in its motion. And that's how it's explained. It's a particle that waves. That's really what it is. At least that's how I've come to understand it in all the models that I've been shown, and that I've seen people trying to explain it. And I understand the mathematics is weird. There's an experiment, a simple experiment, an explanation, for example, for why we have no proof of photons, for example. Nobody's ever seen a photon. Nobody's ever captured a photon. Everything that we have that's proof of photons is actually indirect. It's measuring it through absorptions, measuring it through reflections, but never actually grasping a photon itself. The electrical engineer Robert Distinti, you can look up on YouTube. He has I think his channel is Distinti's Universe. You can look up Distinti Aether and Light. One of his latest videos, somewhere about a month and a half ago, was this magnificent video of him going about how we do not have any proof about the corpuscularity of light. And he says the way we measure light, literally, for example, a double slit experiment, you have the points of light going through the slits, and they accumulate in the background, they create a pattern, either a wave pattern or a fringe pattern, interference fringe pattern. But the way that that receiving light up end of the experiment works is that that's the one that has the minimal size. And he compares it to the analogy of film, in which film has grains which are activated by a certain amount of light. And this you can have multiple ones that are activated by the same types of energies, which will show you a completely different size of grain. The bigger grains absorb more light, but they also, the smaller ones absorb less, and so you need more. And so his point about that is that the background of those experiments is not a proof of photons, because the whole thing is designed already to display to us photons. That the things that will light up at the back of the panel of the wave of the double slit experiment is already something that's granular. It's something that is particulate. And therefore, if it's meant to light up, it's going to light up as a particle. Obviously, it's not going to light up as a wave. So stuff like that. And, and if you think that, obviously the scientists taking these things into account, you'd often be surprised that they don't. There's plenty of stupid shit that I'm surprised that a lot of physicists just never took into account. For example, the disproving the ether. The Michelson-Morley experiment was a fucking shoddy experiment. It didn't disprove jack shit. It was done in a very haphazard way, and nobody bothered to double check it. For a long time. The next person to double check it was one of the top astronomers at a university. I forget who he was. He's famous. He's famous because he was a big thorn in people's side until he died, because he was adamant that the ether was real. And he designed a far more elaborate interferometer, as well as did far more experiments with it. And he deemed that the information that he'd gathered was proof that there was, and that even the Michelson-Morley experiment, the calculation was, showed that it was not a null result, that there was an ether wind, that there was a drag to the velocity of light. Not only that, if you look at the official measurements of the fundamental variables, like C, up until I think like 1948, C kept changing every goddamn year when this thing was issued. And then they got tired of it, and they literally just redefined C by the meter, so that C would always be constant regardless of the fact if C changed or not, because the meter was defined by C. So, if you define light to always be running at, such and such amount, like meters per second, but you now define the meter according to light, then light will always be measured as running at that, because the meter is measured according to that. So there's bullshit. There's bullshit going on with the belief of these constants. They're not actually constant, and the way that they claim them to be is not valid. So I'm very distrustful of standard orthodox science. Not because I think people, I don't think there's a conspiracy, for example. I don't think there's the Einsteinians trying to, keep the truth down. I just think a lot of people are heavily biased for financial reasons. They're biased for ideological reasons, and they literally just don't notice it. They just don't notice it. And when you bring it up to them, they can't cognize it. They can't comprehend that they're biased. And so, they just dismiss you and, throw your shit out of the claim and says, well, you know, bring up your entire completed theory that, overthrows all of Einstein. Well, nobody can do that. It's literally never happened. Einstein didn't do that. Einstein didn't overthrow Newton by bringing in an overwhelmingly tested theory that, was complete. Einstein overthrew some specific things of Newton, but not everything. Nonetheless, people immediately jumped ship and said, like, oh, we want to go with this. It was exciting and new, and the things that it was predicting was amazing. But likewise, we come to a point in which Einsteinian relativity and general relativity aren't predicting just as many things as you would expect. There's anomalies everywhere. There's a crisis of anomalies right now. You don't know about it because they'll never tell you. You don't, unless you keep up with news, and the news, just comes in day and out. Yeah, plenty of physicists have no clue about the conceptual clarity or comprehension of anything. They don't understand what the fuck they're talking about when they talk about space. I have this criticism, which is going to part of my revised portion on time. I haven't read Feyerabend, or Feyerabend, as Hyperion tells me. He's on my to-read list because he's definitely critical of the scientific method in its state. I think the last stream I mentioned that I used to be against the idea that we can have a plurality of theories. I used to think that no, we have to have a unity of one. Science is about we all agree, consensus of the reality. Now I realize that that's just bullshit. That we cannot have a consensus of reality if we have a closed vision of what reality is. What science has to do is allow the most broad and open vision of reality that we can muster. Anything and everything that can be experimented with, open game. If you want to experiment with psychic shit and you can show that there's something there, go for it. All this stuff that just because it doesn't fit into our paradigm, it can't be real because my equations don't allow it, is not a good excuse. It's like people who say aliens can't be visiting us. It's according to the laws of physics, it's impossible. Well, who are you to dare tell nature what is and is not possible? Are you fucking God? Well, no. Who dares think that we have got it? I mean, we are absolutely ignorant. There's stuff we don't understand. We don't understand what charge is. We don't understand what matter is. We don't understand what light is. I mean, experts, the top experts always are very open about these things. They're actually very open-minded. It's the fucking grunt people in the middle managers. Those are the ones who are the real assholes all the fucking time. They're the ones who have the stick up their ass about everything, and they pretend to know everything. They pretend that we just have all the answers. Well, aliens don't use fuel, man. They don't need it. Aliens don't run on oil or nuclear, that's for sure. But the idea that they couldn't get here, it's too much. The distance is too vast. As far as the stories go, aliens either siphon shit from another dimension, as far as anybody can describe it, or they just travel here because they're psychic. Dimensional tears, basically. Whether it's 4-dimensional, 5-dimensional, who knows? Weird shit. They're basically not using any. They're not really using proportional. Did you actually read a full Hegel book yet? No. I challenge you to read a whole Hegel book and write what I have written. Let's see if you can do it. I'm not much. I'm not about quantity. I'm about quality. So if I never finish a Hegel book, you know what? I'm not going to be too ashamed, because what I did manage to finish, I finished thoroughly and voluminously. I understand the parts that I read inside and out to a very good degree. And if anybody wants to debate me on that, they absolutely can. Because I've seen people who read the whole phenomenology in the science of logic. For example, Chad Haig has read the phenomenology in science of logic. Let me tell you, Chad Haig doesn't know a tenth of what I know. And it shows. It shows. But likewise, you know, when you encounter anybody who's actually read thoroughly, anybody, you know, even if they've read less than you, it's very obvious the quality that they know is far higher. How does indeterminate being move to determinate being? Being is nothing. The secret to that is literally in that movement. How it is that you know that being is nothing. You know, how it is that you can cognize this. You know, because it is indeterminate in the sense that it's immediate. There is no relation. So there is no determining relation whatsoever. You're not thinking being according to anything. Nonetheless, you're capable of noticing differences. The thing is, you don't have to immediately relate the differences. So, you know, when you see that, when you cognize being, when you cognize immediately and you realize that you can't cognize at all, that realization that you can't cognize at all is the realization of the concept which we call nothing. So, you know, immediate presence is also immediate absence. When you realize that this is a thought process where you begin with one side and you go to another, and you bring that together and you say, okay, this is one thought process, that's becoming. And when you start going through the thought process of becoming, you go coming to be, ceasing to be, and you realize that the whole ceasing to be and coming to be thing ends up going in an endless loop as well, in which there's something about 4 ways to explain that transition. They're clear and they're not. You know, it depends on your mood and day to see whether it actually makes sense to you or it doesn't. But basically, you go from indeterminate being because there's a determination process and because you can recollect. That's how you go from indeterminacy to determinacy. The fact that you can do things while not operating at a higher level, and you can come back and operate them through themselves at a higher level just by doing them. You know, it's like riding a bicycle. You don't have to have a theory of a bicycle to actually have the capacity to ride a bicycle. You know, as a matter of fact, you'll get your theory of riding a bicycle from riding the bicycle. You don't have a theory of determinacy that isn't a theory of determining. So a theory of determinacy is a theory of determining at once. What is determinate has been determined. So how do you get from indeterminacy to determinacy? Well, you have a movement where you begin with pure immediacy. You realize the movement creates something not immediate, that the movement is actually not immediate itself, that it reveals a mediation, and boom, you have determinacy. It's a process thinking, you know, it's not this abstract, you know, here's indeterminacy and here's determinacy. That's not how it is. You know, it's like a gradient. Here's indeterminacy, and you know, it goes from like white to black or whatever, and you see it move, and you know that this is one single movement. You know that it's real because you've done it. You know that it's possible because you've done it. Well, no, I'm sure there's certainly more to be said about that from a higher perspective. But I'm talking about this from the immanent perspective. You know, even by saying something about it is wrong. Because you check out my blog, I've tried to talk about it, and I actually had a professor that I tried to explain this to, a Merleau-Ponty expert. And he was asking the same thing because he's read the secondary literature as well, and he said, nobody's really explaining this. And I said, well, probably it's because it can't be explained in any satisfactory manner unless you actually follow through with it yourself. Because when you're trying to explain it before you actually do it, I read the Holgate thing. Holgate doesn't really explain it. Holgate doesn't explain it in the way that I explain it, because my explanation comes through the process of cognition. I don't think there's any other way to really explain it, because the whole thing is about cognition. You know, it's not that you have indeterminate being and then something leads you to determination. You know, indeterminate being is the process of determination itself already. Um, but it is for your cognition. I mean, you can't pretend that it's not. This is logic. It's not something else. The part about ontology is that this has to do with a mirrored process of structure. Uh, you know, being that is immediate is being that is nothing. Yeah. Indeed, it's not, but it's immanent. You know, you can't pretend that you're not there. It's like the phenomenology where, you know, we can pretend at the beginning that we're just this external observer, but at the end, you got to realize you were there from the beginning. You know, that it's not just a process of cognition, it's your process of cognition. And your process of cognition is the one that you have access to. You realize that the intelligibility of being, yeah, that's a retroactive move. And so when you say that, oh, well, it's just being that moves to nothing, no, it's not. It's the intelligibility of being. You can't just say it, you know, because that's part of the issue that people have, that if you just say that, you don't have an explanation. You know, if you say, well, just being, you know, shifts to nothing. Well, no, it doesn't. Your cognition of being shifts to nothing. You know, the structure of immediacy shifts to nothing. That's what it is. You know, being that is immediate is indeed being that is nothing. It's indeterminate. It has no relation. That's exactly it. But why is it that way? Because the structure of cognition, the movement of cognition itself, is precisely this process of immediate absence. You know, that if you try to cognize immediately, you can't cognize at all. Therefore, being is nothing. You know, immediacy is absence. Okay, what do you mean the realization comes later? Because I've already said this. You have to go through the process before you actually comprehend this. So depending on what you mean by that, yes, I can agree that the realization of that comes later. The point is to think immediately. Obviously, you know, like it's why I say that the explanation. Well, I'm not talking about the notion of subjectivity. I'm actually talking about cognition here. You don't have to go that far. You can just look at this and realize that it's a process of cognition, which doesn't require that much actually. But you would nonetheless have to run through this process of cognizing in this manner, in cognizing immediately, in cognizing through becoming, in cognizing existently, in cognizing something, in cognizing finitely, in cognizing infinitely. These are all cognitions. They're processes of cognition. And the way that they correspond to the reality of ontology, of metaphysics, is precisely in that what we can mean by the things that we talk about as being, or nothing, or becoming, or existence, or essence, is precisely these movements. You'd have to give me an example of what you're talking about. I don't know. In what category could you tell me that something is contingent? No, it's not. When is indeterminate being eliminated? No, it's not. Immediacy keeps coming up. You know, when you have, for example, the infinite, that's not getting rid of the finite at all. The infinite is only through the finite. The mediating is only through the immediate. So no, nothing gets destroyed. I mean, I don't know what you're talking about. Literally, you know, everything that I've read by Hegel, everything that I've worked out has this structure. Nothing is ever taken out. Not in the phenomenology, not in the philosophy of art, not in the philosophy of nature, not in the science of logic, not in the philosophy of religion. Nothing that I have ever read. So why can't it be? Because it's literally what you're constructing out of. That's why it can't be. I mean, like you're saying, you're standing on your foot and you take away your foot now that you've gotten up to the ladder. Well, guess what? Or rather, let me rephrase that. It's like the Wittgensteinian statement about the ladder, right? That once you've climbed up, you can throw it away. Well, in this case, the ladder is the world that's grounding the very structure you're standing on. So if you kick the ladder away, you're going to fall right back to the ground. That's why you can't take it away. You can't take away immediacy from mediacy, because then you don't have mediacy. Mediacy is constructed out of immediacy, right? Just as immediacy is constructed out of immediacy. In the end, you realize that everything is a circular thing. Why can't you have a retroactive me then? Why would you? I mean, the whole thing is necessary. You're going through necessary movements. The reason you can't create a necessary thing, like for example, you don't go from logic to nature. No, no, I don't. I think quite a bit of it is true. I think quite a bit of it is surprisingly true, to an extent that he himself, well, he probably was aware of it, but other people would probably be amazingly surprised at how true some of the stuff he says is. No, I would not say that. As a matter of fact, the only thing that I see wrong with Hegel is that Hegel lacks determinations, not that he has too many or that he has ones that are wrong. Come on. And this would have to do with your comprehension of what the categories actually do and what the categories are about. For example, I've talked about this. What's a determination? It's just a specification, a definition. Yes, they're necessary. Actually, check out the last stream that I did. I went into detail about that, actually, about how people have this misunderstanding that it's about these specific determinations and some kind of correspondence to empirical reality. It's not, but at the same time, it is. Because the whole system is based on a process and a method which is by its very nature retroactively capable of redetermining itself when necessary. But the redetermination, I don't know how you can say they aren't. We'd have to be arguing here about what the nature of truth is, and that's a whole other discussion. The structures of intelligibility are what matters. Hegel himself says that, by the way, in the Philosophy of Nature. That the problem to be faced is not in agreeing with empirical science. The aim of any philosophy of nature is not to agree with empirical science. What empirical science says about nature is, for the most part, irrelevant. Empirical science is there to correspond to the philosophy of nature, not the philosophy of nature to it. So when Hegel comes up with certain concepts, they're not because he thinks, the empirical science will discover these anytime soon. They're just necessities in his determination of nature. But the reason they can be necessary and contingent is because the name of the categories, and this is the important thing, it's the name of the categories that change. The determination of space, for example, as the logic that it is by its very structure impossible. Oh, sorry. It's by its very nature impossible to prove as false because the structure is true. The concept structure is itself true. If it comes out to be that this empirical intuition, which we call space, turns out to be something other than what we can comprehend as self-externality, then the name of the category that we're talking about is not what we thought we were talking about. That's about the level of which Hegel might be wrong. Another one he might be wrong on is missing categories, which I think he is, but that's a retroactive fleshing out in posterity, in which we find out that there's more to be done and more to be said about things. There's a way in which the Hegelian logic literally allows you to be absolutely right and complete and be incomplete at the same time. And so the whole system is contingently complete, but necessarily so. Uh, you know, that unless we ever reach a cognitive level of God, we can't indeed be sure that we have all the things, the categories that really are existent and available. But unless experience shows us otherwise, there's no reason to think there's anything more. You may want to be theorizing about angels and whatnot, but if there is no reason in experience to believe that there are such things as angels and the realms of existence, then they're not part of your philosophy of nature. You don't have to add them. Besides, there's nothing to be said about them that's really worth anything. Because intelligibility is about intelligibility of this world, not of some other world. So, for example, easy things which I would say Hegel might be wrong about. Time. Hegel might be wrong about time. Time might be quite different from what we think it is. Time might actually have dimensionality to it, which is sort of spatial. Maybe one can indeed move through time. So that's up to question. I'm open about that. There might be a further determination of time than Hegel worked out, but that will not prove Hegel's concept of time wrong. It will just merely expand it. Another one is Hegel might be wrong about the order of gravity and electricity. I see this in physics, fringe physics all the time, in which there is a struggle going on between people who want to posit either the same way that you expand the dimensions of space, there might be a further dimension of time other than just the single dimension which gives it. Hegel just gives time this indifferent order of past and future, which really is the now. They're just different moments of the now which are indifferent. But supposing that, for example, something like precognition is real, that tells you something about the existence of time in some manner of some form. It must already be in some sense, and in a sense, this actually just expands certain things that Hegel already has. For example, it just merely expands the concept of eternity, and it makes it so that the real determinations of future and past in nature might be determinable in nature as opposed to in spirit. Because, for example, at what point is it an expansion, not an incommensurability? At no point. Unless, for example, what we think is time, or and not, that's the wrong thing. It's not what we think is time. If, for example, this phenomenon that we call time turns out to be actually gravy, then Hegel's intelligible concept of it would not correspond to this intuition we call time, right? That itself, however, fine. You might say, well, okay, then the concept is incommensurable with the object. Hegel wouldn't see it that way. Hegel would just say, how do you explain time dilation? It's not real. If you believe time dilation is real, you must believe that clocks are the things that tell us time. Clocks don't tell us time. Even Einstein was aware of that, Clock time dilation is not time dilation of a universal sense. You're not reversing time of anything. As a matter of fact, the way I comprehend it and the way I wish to eventually attempt to flesh this out is through a pressure form. You know how you can take a paddle and, on a rowboat and paddle in the water, and it's viscous to a certain extent and it's very hard and it moves slow. And then you paddle in air and it moves way faster. And then you take that up in space and it's going to move way faster without the resistance of air. That's basically what clock dilation is. These when we're talking about clock dilation, we're talking about atomic clocks. These things are experiencing spatial pressure at a very fine degree. And stuff like radiation, because that's what's being measured, radiation. These clocks, atomic clocks, are keep their stability according to radiation in that form. All of that, if space is material, and space is, I am absolutely certain of this, is material and must be material. Therefore, movement through space must have an impact on material bodies. Therefore, something like the propeller effect of putting a propeller paddle in the water or in air or in space makes a significant difference. And therefore, the explanation of time dilation would be nothing but explanation of the viscousness or viscosity of space itself at any range of relation. And therefore, closer to the dense bodies, space would be more viscous. Away from the dense bodies, it would be less viscous. What do you think velocity difference has to do with it? You ever seen a balloon? Okay, you know about the body length contraction issue in physics? That the question is, does the body actually contract physically, or is it just a relativistic appearance? And there's no good reason to think one or the other. As a matter of fact, I think there's just good reason to think that the body really does, contract. And so, how does that body contract? Why is that body contracting? Well, it's contracting due to its own relation to itself, its own internal pressures, as well as pressures from space. You put in a radiating atom into a particle accelerator. You accelerate it to fractions of to the speed of light, close. And it reduces its half-life by or increases its half-life by twice. How do you explain that? Well, it's bleed pressure. It's something's bleeding air through pressure. You apply pressure to it. Sorry. And what would you expect? You expect the thing to deflate slower. Oh, dang it. Where's this light stuff? It's pretty dark. Oh, there we go. So anyways, time dilation, half-life increases, all of that can be easily conceptually explained by the fact that space is material and there are pressure gradients going on, especially when you're speeding up. I mean, it's like you speed up in a car and you're hit with air in your face, and the faster you go, the harder it feels. That's exactly what's going on with those things. So, time dilation as time travel of a sort, not real. It's a slowing of time. I will give you that, because time is concrete. Time is not time as such. Time is the time of things. An apple has time, and if you put an apple in a fridge, normally it'll rot within a week, and you put it in a fridge and it won't rot for a month. What have you done? You slowed its time. You've meddled with its time. You've literally done time travel. You've done time manipulation with that thing. All these things are time manipulations. We just don't recognize it. We think that it's something supremely spooky and weird, when it's actually very mundane. Time dilation is a rather mundane thing, and it has to do specifically always with motion and speed. No, by the very way that black holes work, yeah, that time difference would be real. Absolutely. We don't know what that time difference would do to us. We speak of it as if it would be like this unnoticeable thing. But when you think about it in a material term, you have to ponder whether there are actual real effects. It's not just simply, my time frame and your time frame are now off kilter. Maybe it is that in experiencing a different time frame, you also have to experience a different physics that isn't unnoticeable, but rather quite noticeable. So there's certain things about that. By the way, I hate Interstellar. Shitty movie. I hate pop science. I watched it last year with Hyperion, and oh god. No, I was gonna write a review, I think, and then I just it was bad, but it was not bad enough. When I write movie reviews and I try to make them funny, So reality, as Hegel talks about it, existence depends what you mean by existence. There's basic existence at the beginning of logic, and then there's existence in the logic of essence. Being is complete immediate abstraction. World, when you talk about world, I think you're talking about nature. Actuality is, accordance to. I haven't read into the logic of essence, so I don't know precisely what Hegel says about actuality. Most people just say actuality is, that something actual is in according, it's in accord with its concept. So, it's actual to the extent that it accords its concept. But I don't use those words precisely because I don't have that technical grasp of them. So, most of the time, if you read my blog or you listen to my videos, I won't be talking about, I will not talk about things on the level of, say, the concept or the universal or essence or all these other things. I tend to mainly talk about things from like this very, very low level of just abstract cognition. Because those are the only things that I can really talk about. I've only read up until the beginnings of logic of quantity. Okay. I usually don't talk about things in that way, and even when I get to that point, by the way, I won't talk about things in that way because I think it's kind of useless to talk about it in that way, really. Actually, I think I've critiqued Chad Haig on that, in which, like, when you start talking about things, about this high level abstraction of talking about ideas, talking about the notion, notional thinking, all these other things. I don't see the point. If you're writing a treatise, I can see the point. If you're developing a system, I can see the point. When you're talking about things in a real sense, it's too much. Being honest, to me, a PhD doesn't really fucking matter. There are idiots with PhDs. I know because I've met a few philosophers. I've also seen a few, and they're very famous. People like Lawrence Krauss, for example, are idiots. People like Black Science Man are idiots. They may have PhDs. No, I don't like Neil deGrasse Tyson. Why are you watching Eggo Waffles? Who invited you? Don't listen to me about physics. Learn for yourself, who you who you think has something worthwhile to say and who doesn't. I mainly listen to people based on content rather than criteria of having titles and details. Yeah, I mean, for example, who is it? His name is Ravelli. Ravelli is a famous string theorist nowadays, working on loop quantum gravity. And Ravelli is mostly famous right now because of his talks on the philosophy of time. And you listen to Rovelli, and for the most part, he's right. He's spot on the money. His critiques of the usual ways that we conceive time are pretty good. And then he goes into his own theory of time as entropy, and that's just plain stupid. I mean, like, even though like up until that point, you're like, yes, 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 you got it. You've hit on the nail. So what's wrong with all these other notions of time? And he talks about his notion of time, and you're like, how could you regress? How could you critique these other things and then fall into the very positions you have critiqued? Because for entropy, you need time. So to explain entropy, to explain time through entropy, particularly the arrow of time, does not work. Eggo Waffles. Let me tell you something, man. You have lost all my respect. And I did have respect for you. Even when you blocked me about a year ago, I still had respect for you, and I told you that. But the fact that you have literally fallen, the fact that you have literally fallen this far into just inane stupidity is, well, let's just say I don't give a shit. You can stick around and watch, but you're not spamming my fucking thing. Uh-huh. Right. But anyways, I know we've been going on for about... Well, I wouldn't get into an argument with, what's his name? Marty MD about this, honestly. Because it's a pointless argument. Part of it, I honestly don't care. Because that way of talking is not the way I talk about things. Even when I get to that point, I'm not going to talk about it in that way. It's an utterly useless thing to me. I don't like it. I don't think it's useful. I think it's obfuscating for most of the time. People try to talk about this as if it's some deep, meaningful thing. It's not. When we for example, you try to talk about essence. Are you going to talk about every single determination of essence when you're talking about it? No. Are you going to talk it into the very technical sense? Yes, but at the same time, you can talk about it in the technical sense without using the Hegelese. Well, I think he comprehends. I think it's very clear that he's read his Hegel. So, I don't think we have to explain it to him. But, I will have to, I do want to explain that I don't particularly care. I'm not particularly impressed by that. And, what I'm interested in seeing is seeing the deployment, not of these categories, but rather of the method. That's what really would impress me, and what you see almost nowhere. It's kind of bizarre because once you know how to do the thing, and you're like, yeah, it can be done, and there's no problem. But if I did it, for example, if I wrote a new science of philosophy, dare to be a new Hegel, would I do what Hegel did, and would I be mentioning this is the idea here? For the most part, I would not. For the most part, I absolutely would not, because I hate it when he does it. I think it detracts from what he's doing. That unless you're the part of the very, very few people who are absolutely interested in drawing every little bit of detail, getting the blood from the stone of systematic philosophy, in which you can't do it for yourself apparently, um, then I don't see the point of mixing all these other terms. For example, when you go into the philosophy of nature, and Hegel says time is the becoming of space. Well, you didn't have to say that. You can see it. If you know what time does, you don't need to be told that it's becoming. If you know what matter does, you don't need to be told that it's doing anything else. If you know what space does, you don't really need to be told that it's quantity. Certain things are very good to bring up because they're very interesting. They bring to light certain things about the intelligibility. For example, the whole thing's about math, quantity, and space. That's a really interesting point to bring up. But time is becoming? No, not really. Other things that Hegel brings up all the time, like idea and whatnot in various other sciences like philosophy of history, a lot of that shit is more confusing than it should be, precisely because he did that before, because he brought up these terms which, unless you've read the science of logic entirely, you don't know what they mean. And you're stuck with, well, is this meaningful? Is it not? Am I supposed to know it? And had you just gone with it, you probably would have grasped it. But anyways, been going on for an hour, actually 2 hours now. So I'll be going.